You're right, guys. Welcome back to the Golden Middle Age. It's been a while since we last done a video, but it was worth the wait because today we have a special guest and a fellow content creator, Isa Martel, who has his own YouTube channel. I believe it's called Beit Al Asad, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct. Yeah,
Yes,
that's it.
and and today we decided to do a video specifically talking about Ottoman armor. But I'm not going to do the introductions. I'll allow Issa to introduce himself. And if you could talk about your background, Issa, that would be great. And welcome to the channel as well.
Oh, thanks for having me. Yeah, so my name is Issa Martel, and I do, amongst other things, some historical swordsmanship, um, and it's evolved from just doing fighting into now like pretty much armored combat. I studied for a number of years um, with Dr. Khorassani, and we were in Razmafzar. But then we left that. Then we founded this own new group called Beit al-Assad, like you mentioned, which is devoted to like the Islamicate, is what they call, which would kind of be like any spot in the Islamic world that would have been under Islamic rule. Um, and not just directly for Muslims. So anything in this culture, basically, it broadened from just being like a one country centered thing to very broad, and that allowed us to do pretty much anything that we thought was cool and go from there. So um, we teach swordsmanship generally. We have some workshops. I taught my past background is I taught a number of workshops as well. Besides this, I also do some Zircane training. We just started that, and I also do karate as well with my son.
Amazing, amazing. That's a lot of things you do, much more than me. So it's it's great to have you on to hear about your expertise, specifically when it comes to swordsmanship. So, you mentioned in Beit Al Asad you teach swordsmanship. Sorry. So, if you could go into a bit more detail about that and tell us about what type of swordsmanship you teach. Is it very general, or is it focused at a specific time or era?
Um, so me personally, I generally teach some sort of swordsmanship class that would be based off of Shamshir. Um, we can teach any weapons, but this is kind of the main weapon. A sword, a Shamshir, is a curved sword, like a saber. Um, the word Shamshir is Persian, so a lot of people uh, think the if you say Shamshir, that's a Persian sword, like the general curved saber. But it's not really the case because it Shamshir just means sword, so a straight sword would be called a Shamshir as well. Um, that's generally the class that I teach. It's um, very Persian based just because of my background. Um, and we can say it stretches through the middle to maybe the 16th or 17th century style fighting, but it's highly focused on armored fighting. So it would be the moves that you do would be taking into account that you're wearing armor. Uh, so while you might see some people do swordsmanship like with sabers, it's very flashy and they might be twirling around and stuff like this, and a lot of very light slashing type of strikes. Um, what we have, me, I guess, I'm saying we because there's a bunch of us, but me specifically have kind of fine tuned that into fighting in armor, and specifically like my armor's Ottoman, so it's kind of now taken a further step into like fighting in Ottoman armor and like how the armor works in comparison with other types of armor. from different countries or whatever.
Okay, that's very interesting. So I guess what you teach is more of, let's say, real sword fighting, because that's how they would have thought with armor, right? So it's much more practical on how to, let's say,
Yeah,
strike a hard blow onto the opponent.
yeah, that's what our aim is. So, and to order to do that, obviously you have to have armor, and so a lot of times, I mean, it there is a cost, money like associated to buy armor, but a lot of times once you have even small pieces of armor, you'll start to see how the armor may have directed the style of fighting, or vice versa. Like the style of fighting might have had a say in how armor was developed for these regions. So, specifically, like with Ottoman, or we can just say Middle Eastern armor, I guess for now, we can include, in a broad sense, we can include like Turkey, Persia, Mamluk period. Um, like they all, you can see a type of armor that they all wear is like bazubands, and they're like forearm armor that goes like this.
Yep.
So an example of something like this would be how it would influence is that there's simple blocks that you can do with your bazuband. So if you imagine that you're fighting, um, you would understand like I'm going to use my forearm to block also, and as opposed to I'm not going to get hit in the forearm. So I feel that this types of things um, help you redevelop how they fought back then historically. We don't. I feel that a lot of learning has come because initially it seemed like the people that were doing this, came into it from like a Western idea of how swordsmanship should be. Most of our books on swordsmanship are from Europe. So a lot of us kind of had this like, and we're Westerners, so we have this mindset of like, this is swordsmanship. But as we go along, it seems like we have to deconstruct that mindset, and maybe perhaps um, these people in different cultures fought completely differently, and their armor and the weapons reflect that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's really important to really bring it back to its source and to its origin, rather than take it for example, from what, let's say, the Western view is, when really, as you said, when once you really look into it, it's completely different. And just to, although you mentioned Ottoman
Yeah.
armor, and hopefully would love to hear more about that. But before we speak about the Ottoman armor, I just have a question for you. So when you do the fighting, do you look at Furusiyya manuals and treaties that emerged during the Mamluk period to kind of dictate how you fight, or is it something more experimental that you do?
Well, we kind of both. So part of originally we had looked at like these manuals, and we still do. Like there's like the Mamluk manual that's being translated now, um, and we looked at other like manuals. There's one that I know that had more Janissary style fighting in it. Um, so we, yes, to answer your question, yes, we do look at those manuals, but we also like try to incorporate things that we might just like experimental archaeology type of thing, where it's like,
Yeah.
okay, by doing it seems like this might be the way it should have been, based off I'm wearing this and this covers this, so why would you do that when it might be blocked by this piece of metal
Mm.
or something, you know what I mean? So
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
there is that type of idea. And now too, I started to do like Persian meal work. Um, and I'm noticing that even maybe swinging the sword we were doing wrong, just from, you're taught to swing these other things, so it it is like a kind of like a meshing of all these traditional studies. At least how I view what I do is to take these things and kind of be like, okay, well, they invented these zircone places with meals and this, and the point was to train them how to use a sword, you know, and how to
Yeah,
like do that. So why not, if I really want that like deep knowledge of like, okay, let me see how this works, let me try to do that to see how that can affect how you like swing the sword and move your body and stuff. So that's kind of how I view it. Is yeah, we have the manuals, but even perhaps like the manual, you know, like if you're reading the teacher's notes, there's a lot of stuff the teacher's going to leave out because he's able to show you right there, you know, like during the class or something. So, you know, even in the manuals, you kind of figure if you read them like that, there's a lot of stuff that's like missing from manuals that they would have probably either instinctually known or contextually or socially might have known, where we don't know, you know. So
yeah,
it's a
yeah.
fun time to try to
E-
figure this stuff out.
exactly, exactly, and that's obviously where the experimental archaeology, as you said, comes in, right? To really that's how you
Yeah,
actually
exactly.
find out and live it, and to really see how it functions. So yeah, so we're gonna go to the Ottoman armor, seeing as you're very
Yeah.
well versed on that, and I'd like to start off by, before going into the nitty gritty of Ottoman armor and what each, you know, plate does and its function. I'd like to sort of discuss its history and take your view on it. So from what I've read and from you know, the research I've done, the basic research, found that there was a lot of let's say Mamluk influence in the Middle East, especially, let's say, starting from the Abbasid period, because they would train the soldiers, or the Mamluks that they would get from the east, to become soldiers, and this is where a lot of the influence started to come in, and we could see it through, for example, lamella armor, and the introduction of curved
Mhm.
swords or sabers. And if we were to say Ottoman armor started from then and actually eventually developed into its own unique set of armor. Is that correct? Or how would you see it? How would you see its development through the Middle Ages until the Ottoman period?
Yeah, I would pretty much agree with that. It seems that the Ottoman, um, you know, that the what we view as the Ottoman is like probably like the last bit of the development of armor in the Middle East, like in the Western Middle East, I guess. You had like
Mm,
Safavids over there as well. But I do think, yeah, it developed from the style of the Mamluks, probably also in combination with the Mughals. Um, the development seemed to be, you had mail or chainmail, as most people call it, um, and then they had that, you see the classic piece like of Mamluk with like the belly plates like sewn, like weaved
yeah,
into the chainmail. They'll have like plates interwoven into it. Um, that seemed to be the next step. Well, we had lamellar as well, you know, but if we're talking into like metal, like it would like develop into that way. And then they start to incorporate much more smaller plates into their chainmail as well. And ultimately, you see like these little discs, maybe about like this big. They start to put them like on their chest, so they perhaps, this would be like the influence from like the Mughals and stuff like this, or like Timur's army, like that, the Mongols that came through. And you kind of see how this little disc started to get bigger and bigger and bigger until you have like that Turkish typical krug is what they call that Turkish cuirass or complete breastplate. Um, so yes, in a summed up in a little way, that's kind of how it developed up until there.
perfect. And if we were to define the Ottoman era, would we say it's from the 15th century onwards?
Oh no, I would, I guess if you're looking era of armor, probably, yeah, okay, we can say that. Or you can probably say late 14th century, because I we did in trying when we started to do my armor, we did find that these Krugs, yeah, I guess 15th century, yeah, they were probably like the mid 15th century to late 15th century. You have that style of armor. Probably before that they wore mail. I mean, because the Ottomans were like 14th century, you know, technically like 1299 to
Yeah, yeah,
1300 is when they started around, and you know, maybe just wore mail or something up until this later point when they added these types of pieces. But yeah, my armor specifically, I had the idea that it might have been um, 15th century armored, you know, late 15th century, early 16th century was my gold dates.
perfect. So you've mentioned your armor. Um, Could you give us a rundown of yours, what you've had made for yourself, based on your historical understanding? Let's go from head to toe,
Yeah.
right? From the whole body.
All right. Yeah. So um, uh, I have a helmet. The helmet is um, I found the helmet in a photo from, I believe it's in Topkapi Museum, but there's only one of this style, and it has like the onion top. In typical, like normally Ottoman, you might think of what they call a lobster tail helmet, and the back of the helmet has uh,
Yeah.
segments that kind of look like a lobster tail, or
Hmm.
they might have just like mail around it. So mine has scales on the back, like the back have scales that go down the back. To me, this kind of looked like more tribally, because in my head, I kind of viewed my armor trying to come from a region that was like a mesh of tribes of Turkish and Persian, as opposed to from the very Western aspects of the Ottomans where they're like fighting Europe, you know. Um, so I had this, that was kind of like my idea of the armor. And then I actually have two different helmets. One is just a complete chainmail helmet,
Yeah.
which I wouldn't wear for when we fight because it'd be too dangerous. But um, I would imagine that would might be used as like a archer or something. They might have had this like light protection on. Um, then from there, initially, I had bought shields. So the first thing I've got, we can go head to toe, but I guess that's also go in the order of how I purchased the armor,
Yeah. Yeah.
because that kind of is seems a little more logical in like the formation of it. The first thing I got was a sword, and then the next thing I got was a shield, and the shield was like a little sapar. It's called. It's like a dished steel shield. Um, in India, they call them dolls. It's not really like a kalkan, because which would be what you kind of think of in Turkish, but we were doing my I since I do more steel combat, the Sapar, and initially we were doing Persian hard was like the main foundation. So Sapar works for that. So once I had a sword and a shield, then I was like, okay, I need some body armor. So I had my gambas on, which is like the jacket or coat or whatever you wear under your armor. This I had made, and I had that. I made a red gambazon that's kind of looks Turkish, and I block printed the patterns onto it. From there, I had the Krug made, which is the chest protection. Um, any here in the US, generally, you don't need to wear chainmail underneath it. Um, and so I didn't get the chainmail at first. The first thing I got was like the Krug, and I kind of built out from there. So I had a helmet. I had chest protection. I had
Yep.
a shield and a sword. Then I got thigh armor. Uh, the thigh armor is also incorporates the knee into it. These are sewn onto like your pants, so they're not like hooked onto your buckle or a belt or anything. On your pants, like you can wear like padded pants under your armor. On that, there are like tie points, and so you can like tie the pieces of armor onto the actual fabric, and that's what like supports like your upper thigh, and your knee is attached to your pants like that. So that's an interesting piece of armor. Getting that to fit like took a while. Um, Getting it to fit, I mean, in like I repeatedly adjusted the tie points until I got the armor to sit where I wanted it to sit when you're moving. I also have then for the rest of my legs going from like your knee to your foot. We have greaves, which are steel plates that go around there.
Yeah.
And then on my foot also, I do have sabatons, which are steel with like chainmail, so you can like it articulates there. Then in my shoulders, um, I have pauldrons, which are it's like a steel cup, and then there's like plate ring and plates going down maybe to the top of my elbow, and then I wear bazu bands and steel gauntlets on my hands. So that was my whole kit, and when I fight, uh, generally we see I do like buhurt dueling. That's what I'll wear. Mostly everything. That's what I'll wear. But ideally, it's like you're fighting in armor, but there's still a lot of gaps in your armor where you can get hit or you can get stabbed. So the final piece I got, and probably because it was the most expensive as well, was the chainmail to go underneath it. And once I got the chainmail, now um, everything is like pretty much solidly covered. And then I also got a skirt that is plates of mail, like mail with plates in it as well. And that covers kind of like your hips and like your backside and everything. So if I put it all on, it's like pretty heavily armored, and this would be kind of like what you would imagine a heavy armored cavalry uh, knight would wear in the Ottoman period, or maybe more infantry. We see like some pictures you can look at. If you look at what they wear versus what I wear, they might not have pauldrons on, like this piece of protection, and they might not have the skirts. So
Okay.
um, for safety wise, what the way I prefer to have all the armor on, it looks
Yeah.
cooler, I think too.
Exactly.
So you know
Yeah.
that's kind of like what I think. And you're like fully, you know, you can't put any more on. You got everything. um, but when you do fight then with it, you learn some things that come into play on how you're fighting, and
Yeah.
a lot of it is the weight of armor. Um, Movement in armor, ideally you want your armor to, if your armor is fitted to you, which it should be, you can relatively move pretty easily. You're just kind of dealing with the weight and adjusting to like, well, you're lifting your arm, but your arm weighs more. You might not have like
Mm.
full rotation of a certain joint just because of the way the design of the armor is or something like that. But
Yeah. Yeah.
um, in general, those are the key factors. But you do feel much more like protective and like, all right, now you have like this mindset that once you put the helmet on, then and you just have like this little like field of vision, you really feel like, okay, now we can fight, and you are um, very hard to defeat in, I would imagine back then. It is very difficult. So when we have all the armor on, we do a style of fighting which mainly you have to stab someone through like an exposed piece of mail to like either get a point or for it to have any effect on what's actually happening. And that seems to be the best way to simulate like how it would have been back in the day.
Wow, wow, that's it's pretty intense. I mean, so let's say slashing your sword continuously and doing combos just doesn't work. You really have to be, let's say, technical and smart with the way you hit someone who's heavily armored like that.
Yeah, that's the thing. So you learn quick, like, and this is kind of what I'm in the beginning. It's like, okay, you're doing all these like slashes and stuff, but you're really just hitting metal plates. So once, that does have a purpose. That's type of fighting. Obviously, if you're unarmed, that's like very late period style fighting because they didn't wear armor. So these slashes and stuff really come into play for them. But it seems like once you like had the more armor you have, the more you're cutting away those like moves. A lot of those moves, it kind of just gets like focused down to like there's like it has like a very exact fine-tuned thing because you do have to hit these little spots like maybe the neck, the armpit, wherever there's a joint like your armor moves, that's like a weak spot. So if we were
Wow.
imagining back then, like you said, the slashing, you're just going to hit armor. A lot of times you do slash and stuff and do that. There is times that would benefit, but it just to like get up close enough to the person where you can like stab them or maybe like wrestle them down to the ground, and then you have like an advantage to stab. You know,
Yeah, yeah,
ultimately, it pretty much comes down to that. If we're talking like realistically back in the day, back then, it came
yeah.
down to like grabbing, and just who could like just fight each other down.
Wow. Okay. So, and I could imagine there must have been a lot of, let's say, walking or facing each other and probing, or in circular motions, trying to find that opening or the slight mistake, and then to attack. Is that correct or no?
Yeah, I would think that's correct, and this is kind of where we start to see people have like their individual styles of fighting go.
Yeah,
You know, um, Especially if it's like one on one. If it's like a one on one duel type of thing, which was popular if we're talking about like Muslim armies, they did have these duels, before the
yeah,
battles.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
so
Exactly.
if you're talking like in this stance, like that's how it would be. Like, okay, you're basically measuring up the guy you're fighting, um, and you do throw shots to see how they react, because maybe you'll throw feints, combos, and this type of thing. Um, but yeah, ideally it's kind of like you're trying to set it up for like the good cut, or the good
Yeah,
strike. It's
the
like,
the final
okay,
blow
let me
sort of
try to
thing.
do like, yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. That's
yeah,
what it
yeah,
is. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. Great,
And
great.
the better your opponent is, the more, fun it becomes because they know like a lot of counter moves. So it like you're like doing things and maybe they're blocking it and they're just
Yeah,
trying to get strike you, but you can block it. And these make like the long and um, more fun and um, battles or matches, I guess you can have.
definitely, definitely. So I'd like to ask you
Yeah.
about the have you started fighting in, I mean, in your, how long have you had this arm, and have you started fighting with it and training with it with your fellow colleagues, or is it something that you're still trying to get to grips with at the moment?
No, yeah, I've had the complete armor for a couple years now, so I have done a number of different styles of fighting with it. I've done Buhurt style of fighting, which is very popular, I think, in Europe. But it's kind of like points. It's full armored. You got to wear armor, and you basically fight, but it's you're getting points for each hit on the person that you get. So in that context, it's not historical in that way. It'd be like historical tournament fighting, where it's like a sport type of thing. Um, but the most integral, or the most um, stuff that we learn from is when we're wearing the mail, and they call it harnish fecton. We don't really have a word for it other than armor combat, but it would involve this style where you're trying to actually like bypass your opponent's armor with specific strikes that are designed to do that.
Yeah,
And that's, to me, that's the funnest one too. Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely.